You won't believe this, but I swear it's true. A couple of years back, my buddy Jake and I decided to go camping in this remote part of the woods, way off the beaten path, no cell service, just us and nature, you know? It was supposed to be a weekend of peace and relaxation. So we set up camp near this old creek, surrounded by tall trees and thick underbrush. The first night was fine, just the usual crackling fire and stories about the local legends. We heard about these so-called hillbillies that lived deep in the woods, but we brushed it off as typical campfire tales. People said they were feral, living off the land, but we were young and invincible, right? The second day, things took a weird turn. We decided to hike a little deeper into the woods. As we wandered, we started noticing these strange markings on the trees, like symbols carved into the bark. They looked old, almost like they were warnings. Jake joked that they were from the hillbillies we'd laughed off the night before. We both laughed, but it sent a chill down my spine. Later that evening, as the sun dipped behind the mountains, we heard something. At first, it was just a rustling in the bushes. We figured it was a deer or something, but then we heard this guttural sound, like a low growl. We looked at each other, and I could see the fear creeping into Jake's eyes. We decided to head back to camp, but it felt like we were being watched. You know that feeling? It was palpable. When we got back, our stuff was still there, but something felt off. Our food was untouched, but the fire pit was scattered, like someone had been messing with it. We tried to convince ourselves it was just the wind or maybe an animal, but deep down, we both knew something wasn't right. That night, we sat up, listening to the sounds of the forest. Then, out of nowhere, we heard it again. Louder this time, a sort of high-pitched cackle followed by heavy footsteps. We grabbed our flashlights and peered into the darkness. Nothing, but the feeling of being watched was stronger than ever. Around midnight, we heard a loud crash, like something heavy had fallen nearby. We jumped up, and that's when we saw them, two figures stumbling out of the trees. They were tall, ragged, with wild hair and skin that looked almost gray in the flashlight's beam. They had these hollow eyes, and they just stared at us, not moving, not making a sound. My heart felt like it was about to explode. Jake whispered, "Let's get the hell out of here." We packed up as fast as we could, adrenaline pumping, but the figures just stood there, watching. I don't know how we managed it, but we got everything together and started to hike back to the car. The whole time, it felt like they were following us, always just out of sight, but close enough that we could hear them moving through the brush. When we finally reached the car, it was like a weight had been lifted. But just as we were about to jump in, one of them broke through the trees, holding a rusted axe. It didn't say a word, just stood there grinning with this crazed look. I've never been so scared in my life. We didn't even think. We just bolted into the car, locked the doors, and sped away. As we drove off, I could see them in the rearview mirror, just standing there, watching us leave. We didn't talk much after that, both of us too shaken to put the experience into words. I still think about it sometimes, wondering what would have happened if we hadn't left when we did.